Hey, this is Jeff. Welcome to On the Chain. Welcome to our deep dive off the block segment. We have an amazing guest with us tonight. Really excited to introduce him. You guys are probably familiar with the Celsius platform. We have Alex Mashinsky with us. He is the CEO and founder of Celsius. Now, if you go back into Alex's history, he was born into communism, raised under socialism. He's currently, one of the who's who in the capitalist environment here, building amazing platforms. A longtime entrepreneur with where he founded several companies like the Celsius Network, like Groundlink, Transit Wireless, Elomatics, Arbanet, and actually Alex founded two of New York's top biggest venture backed exits with Transit Wireless at 1.2 billion and Arbanet at 750 million. Man, I am so excited to have Alex here with us today. And guess what? It's getting ready to start right now.
And now, Off the Block with Jeff and Chip on the chain.
Oh, here we are. Welcome, Alex. Alex, it's great to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Jeff and Chip. Great to be here. You guys do great work digging into the chain. So I love the name too. So great to be on the show.
Awesome, really appreciate it. We have a lot of questions for you today. We want to get a little bit though. I just gave a little intro of your background. I would love to know, when you thought of and you started looking at blockchain, what was that impetus that had you get into blockchain and starting Celsius? But really, that first step when you said, you know what, blockchain is this new direction, the place to be. How did that look?
So it's actually a very long story coming because one of our advisors, Scott Stornetta, is actually the inventor of the blockchain. He created the first blockchain in Belcore in 1991. Around the same time, I was working on Voice over IP, just a few miles away from Belcore in New Jersey in 1994. So I've been aware of the blockchain and Merkle trees and all that stuff for 30 years, right? And the use case just didn't galvanize the killer app or the kind of like the how you implement it in the real world just didn't come to be. And Scott always jokes. He says that it took him 30 years to become an overnight success. But the Bitcoin was really the first time somebody put all the pieces together, because it's not just the blockchain, right? It's also the use case, the network, the open ledger. You got to put all the pieces together, and Satoshi gets amazing credit. I mean, this is like a revolution. It's not just an evolution, right? So Satoshi puts all the pieces together and shows us the way, and then 3,000 projects get started afterwards, right? And I've been involved in many, both as an investor, as an advisor since 2013, more or less. But I've not seen the mass adoption. Having gone through the internet, having created Voice of IP and brought hundreds of millions of people into an application basically overnight, right? It was so easy to convince people to drop AT&T or Sprint and switch to something that we're using right now for free. But it's much harder to convince people to move their money from the safe, good old bank that they've been using for 100 years to something completely new that exists in the cloud, right? So I think the evolution of the use cases is still something that we're struggling with, because really the killer app is store of value for Bitcoin, and maybe Tether, which is like a payment system that we run on Ethereum, right? Those are the only two use cases that have scaled, even though the community itself is only 30 or 40 million users versus 4 billion users on VoIP.
Right.
That's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Chip. I know
I was
you
gonna say, so
have
what do you think it's gonna take, Alex? Like, what do you think it's actually gonna take? I mean, we're 10 years plus into this experiment since the first Genesis block with Bitcoin. What do you think, in your opinion, it's gonna actually take? Because we're starting to see some new flood of people coming and going. What's the next step for that so-called mass adoption?
Well, that's why I got so frustrated in 2017, because instead of seeing us going to solve real world problems, what I've seen is this Cambrian explosion of experimentation with everything blockchain. We went from focusing on a few things that may work, kind of following Satoshi, right? A cash system, peer-to-peer cash system or whatever, to, oh, we're going to cure cancer, we're going to cure healthcare, we're going to cure the supply chain, we're going to do everything, right? Gaming, everything is going to move to the blockchain. And we spend over $20 billion worth of investors' money, right? Resources, experimenting on everything, right? Hitting with a shotgun in every direction, hoping that we're going to land on the killer app. And for me, having gone through VoIP, right, having seen the internet evolution, from which really we got 5 companies, right? 5 great companies out of the entire internet, right? Google, Facebook, Netflix, and so on, right? The FANGs. For me, it was clear that the solution had to do with something financial, because the blockchain is not good for everything. It's the slowest, most expensive database ever created in human history. So most things are just not going to run on a blockchain. At least they're not going to run well on the blockchain, right? So I said, okay, if we have store of value and we have a form of payment, what is a third item that could be something that everybody needs? And that's where me and my co-founders created something that never existed before: interest income on the blockchain, right? So we focus just on that. I know a lot of people calling Celsius Network a lending platform, but we're not really a lending platform. We just crossed 100,000 users, and every one of our users comes to us because they want to earn interest. Some of them take a loan, maybe 10% of them take a loan, but 90 or 100% of them want to earn interest, right? So the use case that 7 billion people can earn interest on the blockchain is, and I keep saying that, and people, even right now, people don't understand what I'm talking about. They still saying, oh yeah, lending and borrowing. I'm like, no, interest income. You understand? So look at Japan, look at Europe, look at the United States. It's all going down to 0 or negative, right? So if the rates are 0 or negative, and the central banks are printing tens of trillions of dollars, where are you going to hide, right? So you need a non-correlated asset, and you need to earn real return, real interest income on those non-correlated assets. That's what Celsius created that never existed before. We pay interest on 26 digital assets, and we pay interest on gold now. For the first time in history, you can buy digital gold, and I don't mean Bitcoin. I mean physical gold that sits in Switzerland, that you have a token representing it, and that earns 4% per year income.
That's a really great statement. I'm glad you brought that up, because it kind of galvanized that thought process in my mind now, because I have been referring to it as lending, borrowing, but 100% it makes sense. Interest income. I really like that, reclassification of the terminology, because that's exactly what it is. As you're, putting up your digital asset and finding a way to earn income off of that via, and obviously interest bearing, especially at a time where banks have been at point whatever percent, and it's meaningless, in the overall grand scheme of things. That point whatever percent for most people, it's something. I guess something's better than nothing, but having that mechanism. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you have to compare it to inflation. It's not, the comparison is not to what the bank pays. The comparison is to inflation. If inflation is 2, 3, 4%, and you are getting paid half of 1% or less, then you're negative 2.5%, right?
Good.
So if Celsius pays you 4% or 5% on Bitcoin, now you have to compare the dollar minus inflation, to
Yep.
Bitcoin plus whatever appreciation. So the gap is much, much greater than half of 1% versus what we're paying, right? So and one more very important point that, again, most people miss, because our governments, our politicians, our central banks are very good at educating us about what they want us to know, but they're very bad at not educating us, not sharing with us the information about the things they don't want to know. So when we
Right.
measure inflation, we exclude the most important thing, which is inflation of money, right? So what do we measure? CPI measures internet access. It measures the price of sugar. It measures the gasoline. It does not measure how much money did we add to the economy. The Fed in the last 4 weeks have printed more money than in the 100 years that existed to date. In
Yep.
4 weeks, it printed more money than in 100 years. So we had almost 20% inflation in 1 month, inflation of money that no one is talking about. I have not seen a single show on CNBC or Bloomberg or anywhere, not a single person talking about what is the inflation of money. And when it doesn't matter if you own a home or if you own stocks or bonds, everything else, you're in the dollar bucket. Everything is correlated to the dollar. If the Fed just imprinted 20% more, you just got debased by 20%. And that's what most people don't understand. That's why you must have Bitcoin, Ethereum, gold, silver, and so on, because you have to get out of that bucket in which the politicians and the central banks are basically using the invisible hand, Adam Smith, right, to basically steal from you.
That's man, that's such a great point. One of the ideas that we try to bring on this show is to help people better understand what it means to be free. So that freedom, and as I kind of introduced you, and and as you promote yourself, leaving a communist socialist environment to be able to live in capitalism. Most people that are born into freedom don't understand it and take it for granted, and then we begin to squander our freedoms, and we allow this control and this misinformation to kind of be pushed on us. And you bring up such an amazing point. And so one of the things that we've done, I think, well so far within our on the chain community, and as we see new people coming, there are a lot of new investors coming into this space, and for them to get a better understanding of what's really happening and kind of step outside of the mainstream media. Where do you see things going? I mean, it's like, here you have a platform trying to get people accustomed to earned interest income, through their blockchain, through gold, as you'd mentioned. Where are we going right now that we're facing this kind of a black swan event with the global economy crashing? Well, what do you see the next steps are?
Yeah, so look, first, we live in the greatest country ever created, okay? I lived in many countries. I worked with the Voice of IP. I worked with almost every phone company in the world, right? Over 150 different phone companies where we launched in Japan and in Singapore and Korea and Brazil, you name it, right? So I got to travel more than most people, right? Physically lived in, 18 or 20 countries, right? For a prolonged period of time. And there's no country that is better than this country. And I spent 32 years here. So, it's a melting pot of the best people with the best ideas. So I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to come out of this. The problem is that we are wasting precious resources on the past instead of the future. So if you look at, it's not that I don't agree with the Fed activity or with the government printing 2.3 trillion and now another 3 trillion. That's not the point. It's not the point that we have to put money to work. There's no question about it. The question is, are we going to bail out the casinos and the airlines and the cruise companies and the hotels, or are we going to invest in the future? And we all recognize, for a change, the right thing. Great. It's funny because I'm a frustrated Republican. I'm not really a Trump supporter, but Trump kind of said what the future is going to be. I'm going to make America great again. I'm going to bring supply chain back to America. And that's what's happening. It's not happening because he did anything. It's happening because Corona popped the bubble. But we need to put the $10 trillion to work on that. We need to bring supply chain manufacturing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, all of that here, and we need to do it as fast as possible. And we have a beautiful system that proved itself again and again and again over the last 100 years, which has a bankruptcy process in it. There is a reason why we have a bankruptcy process, because failing companies or zombie companies, doesn't matter if it's because Corona or because of bad actions they took, deserve to go through that process. Most people don't lose their job when you go through bankruptcy, right? And they reincarnate as something that is actually beneficial for the community, beneficial for the economy. And we're not allowing capitalism to work. What we're doing is what I've seen, the worst thing that I've seen in socialism and the communism, where the government jumps in and basically decides who's going to win and who's going to lose.
That's right.
I feel like it's like, seriously, this is the greatest country in the world. This is the shiny house on a hill. And what happens when we have a moment of stress? We became the worst guys out there. We became just like the communists.
Hit the panic button. Yeah, hit the panic button. And so you brought up something earlier, Alex, I think is really interesting. You said out of the 90s, we had these big tech companies and the dot-coms, but there was a time when in the dot-com world, you threw a name up with the word .com after, and a bunch of VCs ran after it and threw some money at it. But that quickly worked its way out. We had the bubble pop in 2001, and then we started moving down the road a little bit. Now, one of the things that I think for the first time ever, we're seeing the U.S. not leading when it comes to blockchain. All these companies had to move outside the U.S. because of the unknowing regulatory nature. What do you see happening with regards to regulations? Because all these great minds and companies that wanted to be here, they had to leave in order to do some of the things they wanted to, because there's no regulatory clarity. How do you see that changing in the U.S., or do you see it changing in the U.S. over the next couple of years?
Look, I don't side with the SEC a lot, but this time I do have to side and give credit to the SEC. First, there's nothing you can point to and say this regulation is against the blockchain. So Celsius did an ICO, but we filed the Reg D with the SEC. We filed with FinCEN. We did everything that was required of us as a company, Delaware company, C Corp, that just did everything everyone else did, and we never had any problems. So all the people who are whining and bitching about the SEC or somebody else just didn't follow the rules, right? They skipped, they tried to pretend like they're not securities or they're not whatever. And then when they got caught, they ran out of the country. So the rules apply the same to everyone. The rule of law still applies. The question is, are you going to pretend that you're not, or are you going to do the right thing? And I think a lot of it has to do with what you've seen coming out of Silicon Valley, where you've seen companies like Uber and Airbnb basically break the rules, right? Operate illegally, either in ground transportation or in the hospitality space. And a lot of new wave of companies said, if they can do it, I can do it also, right? It's just when you deal with money, it's a little different than allowing a guy who sharing his car. No, he's not sharing your car. He's just a limo driver, just like the taxi guy or the limo guy next to him. You're just pretending like he's a ride-sharing person, and you're bypassing the local laws. So the issue is that when you deal with people's money, the government is much more strict about that. And it says, look, I might not slap you on the wrist if you're a limo driver and you didn't get the proper license, but if you're taking people's money and you're mismanaging it, I'm definitely going to go after you. So I think most of the issues in our community have nothing to do with regulations. Actually, if you look at stable coins, for example, the United States is leading the world. Europe and other people are basically trying to squash that. So I disagree that there is any kind of negativity or slowdown or any kind of, we have seen zero friction from the government or from the regulators about anything we're doing. There was a lot of pushback from banks. The banks are complaining about Celsius to the regulators every day, right?
That's
and to the states. But we have not seen anything where a judge or somebody in a government office said, oh, I'm going to side against you because you're not good for society.
Man, I had a really good question lined up for you, but you bring up the banks, and I have to ask this. It's something that I've seen kind of unfolding. I'm sure others have talked about this. I talk about it a lot. That as we see exchanges kind of moving in this banking space, we have Celsius kind of in that banking space, as you'd mentioned. You're getting a lot of pushback from the banks. Do you see that we're getting to a point where there's going to be a blending? Exchanges being in the banking space, becoming banks, and which one wins? Are banks going to move first into the crypto space, or is the crypto space going to move into the banking space and potentially overtake the banks? What do you see with that?
So I want to go back to voice over IP because I think it kind of galvanizes the issue. So the reason voice over IP, or what we're using right now, worked and killed basically the phone companies, none of the phone companies charged for any of these services, is because there was a new highway, a new rails, which was TCP IP and UDP and so on, that were created that allowed everybody to bypass the TDM network, or the time division multiplexing network, that was dominant for almost 100 years. So just like we switched from an old system to a new system, and it took 20 years for it to get up to speed, and we still have issues. We're using video and sometimes it cuts out and so on, and it freezes and so on. This is after 30 years, right? The same thing with banking. The job is not to take the blockchain, which is a new set of rails, and try to bring it to be like the banks. The job is to create services that act in the depositor's best interest, because none of the banks act in the depositor's best interest. The bank's job is to extract as much as possible out of the depositors and deliver it to the shareholders. JP Morgan made $36 billion in profit last year. How much did they pay in interest? They have 14 trillion in assets. Half of the assets pay zero, not even half of 1%, right? So what do? They can afford to pay you 1%, 2%, even 3%. They earn 15 to 16% return on capital. They publish that in their quarterly numbers. So they can easily afford to pay you more. The issue is they don't have to. They don't have to pay the depositor, because their focus is Jamie Dimon is exceptional manager who's delivering all the value back to the shareholders. So the promise, and it goes back to your first question to me, which was, why did you create Celsius Network? The promise is to do what we did with voice over IP. That's why I always say we're going from VoIP to MoIP, money over IP. And the promise is to deliver the value to the depositor, not to the shareholder. And Celsius from day one committed to give 80% of our earnings. Anything we create, 80% goes back to the depositor. And no bank in the world, no bank has done that in 700 years. There has never been a bank that gave 80%. Even community banks have not given 80% back to their depositors. So the opportunity is, if we're going to remove the middlemen, if they're going to remove the centralized organization, the toll collectors, then let's not be like the bank. Our slogan is unbank yourself. So right. I don't want us to end up like a bank or win or get somewhere in the middle. The whole point is, just like with AT&T, just like with Deutsche Telekom and all the other guys, is to move all their customers to be our customers on the blockchain.
That's interesting. So at some point, then if the banks want to stay relevant, then they have to adopt MoIP. If they don't want to adopt MoIP, then they're no longer relevant and they disappear, and they go away, or they get bought out, or whatever happens.
We in the last month we launched in London. We launched with an app called Mode that is a partnership with a bank that allows you to have a bank account and a crypto account all in one app that pays you high interest income, right? But it's not because a bank wanted to do it. It's because the regulators basically said to the bank, you have to do it. If this company wants to launch the service, you have to give it to them. And the same thing in Germany. We just launched the first regulated service in Germany, where you have a joint account. This is with a company called Bitwala, where you have a joint account with a bank and a crypto account, right? Where you can store your Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on, and your euros, and earn interest. That never existed in history, right? So these are things that the banks don't want to do, but we're forcing them to do it. Now, the big banks are going to wait as long as possible. Again, JP Morgan has 14 trillion in assets, right? The entire crypto community is 250 billion. They don't even feel that. I mean, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But as
Insignificant.
more and more customers move more and more assets, you will see even JP Morgan start doing something in the space.
Which it seems like we're starting to get a little bit of an inkling that they're putting their toe in the water a little bit. Man, so another question. I guess this now goes to Celsius a little bit. Which now that we're talking about the earned interest and giving back 80% back to the depositors, how for our viewers, how exactly does that work? As people you're holding, people are putting their digital asset into the space. You're able to pay out interest. Is the digital asset that's being stored within the Celsius network, is that going into a cold wallet? Are you then utilizing that is that being lent out? How exactly does the earned interest income, how does that come about?
Yeah, look, and I watched this, the show you did, several episodes you guys did, kind of digging into the space. So it's important that we dive into the details, because I think it's important to also understand the chronology and put things in context. So before Celsius showed up, there were companies that lent you dollars against your Bitcoin. Okay, so Salt and BlockFi and even Nexo allowed you to deposit your Bitcoin with them, and then they gave you 50% in dollars, right? And usually they charged you 18 to 24% for an asset-backed loan. Really, it's just an asset-backed loan, right? So if you go to Wells Fargo and you say, hey, I have a house, can you lend me against it? They'll charge you 4%. So why did all these companies charge credit card rates for something that is asset-backed? And that was because there was just not enough competition, and no one like Celsius showed up and said, hey, that's not a fair rate, right? You should be charging something that is fair. So no, they didn't pay you interest, and they charged you credit card rates on these loans, right? Celsius comes to market and says, this is not acting in the best interest of the community. This is just creating another toll collector that looks just like Wall Street. So what is the best thing we can do with this new set of rails is copy the worst practices of Wall Street and delivering all the earnings to the toll collectors. We just changed the name of the toll collector from Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan to be BlockFi and Nexo and whoever else and Salt. That's all we've done. So my beef with all these companies is not that they're bad people. They're good people. BlockFi is a great company. Have great investors. I have nothing bad to say about them. What I have bad to say about are the practices that all these companies include, and I'm including Coinbase there, and I'm including a bunch of other people that are just toll collectors, right? They're not really here to build this industry and move 7 billion people from poverty and allow them to earn real yield and allow them to be uncorrelated to their underlying fiat currency, which is being debased as we speak. None of those things they're solving. So Celsius came and said, how do we solve these problems? And we said, okay, look, if we take, let's say we're going to one day have 100 million users, and all these people are going to give us their coins, and we're going to lend the coins to the institutions. We're not going to lend them to people. The biggest confusion about what people think about Celsius is that we take coins from retail and we lend back to retail. That's not what we do. What we do is we collect coins from, right now we have 100,000 users, right? So we have about 600 million, just over 600 million in assets. And we then lend these assets to institutions. We have about 260 institutions that borrow from us. And that business exists on Wall Street today. It's called SEC lending, securities lending. If you look at the statement of State Street or in the statement of BlackRock, most of the earnings of those giant companies come from SEC lending. What do? You bought Facebook stock, they take it, they lend it to a market maker or a hedge fund. They charge interest for that, and they keep 100% for themselves. You don't get a check. What you get is a free trade. They used to charge you $4.95 a trade. Now it's zero, but they make a killing on lending your money, right? On lending your assets, in this case, the So we copied that business, but instead of keeping the profits to ourselves, we said we're going to give the community 80% back. So it's very important for people to understand. Anyone who tells you that they're taking your coins and they're putting them in cold storage, well, then they're not earning anything. Then they're
That's
not
right. It
paying
doesn't
you
work.
from real, exactly. So, and some of them go out and say, oh, look, we have 200 million of insurance on our cold storage. Who cares about that? If you have cold storage insurance, how are you paying this interest? Then it's just a Ponzi scheme, right? If your coins are not working, if you're not doing transactions, that's why when you look at Celsius, we publish every week. How many loans did we do? Who did we lend it to? How much did we collect? Did we give you back 80%? All of that, you can audit us on the blockchain and in our app, right? So the transparency part is extremely important as well, because if you don't, try that with your bank. Go to your bank tomorrow, make a deposit, and then say, I want to know where you're depositing it. I want to know who you're lending it to. I want to know how much you're charging them. I want to know if they paid you the interest, and I want 80% of that.
Yeah,
Let's
I've
see
tried
what
that. They
happens.
just blank stares, right?
Yeah, no
Well,
interest there.
they'll kick you out. They'll kick you out and close down your account.
Yeah, here's your money. Have a good day.
This guy Jeff is asking too many questions.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. Then you get
So
blacklisted across the board.
My point is, we invented a new business model, and now everybody's trying to copy us because they're like, "Oh shit, this thing actually works," you know. And Celsius is growing like a weed. Let's just copy everything they're doing, right? So
Yeah.
you'll see us announce something, and 2 weeks later, everybody's like, "Yeah, me too, me too. I'm also doing the same thing."
That's
but
right,
they're not really earning the interest. None of them has published their numbers.
No, but they've on the promise that they all have promised. They all talk about on their sites transparency, and some of them even say they're authorized by the endorsed by the SEC, which is crazy stuff to be putting on your website, right? But I want to talk about another event. So back in March, there was an event where on one particular platform, Nexo, a lot of the people, there was supposed to be a rebalance on the LTV, and there was supposed to be a small sell-off. We had a flash crash, and I want to know what's different. What did Celsius do that protected its users that some of the other platforms didn't even follow their own protocol?
So look, first, I want to go back to Wall Street and see what Wall Street does, right? So flash crashes happen, liquidations happen every day. And on Wall Street, it was March 23rd. It wasn't March 12th, right?
Yeah.
But for Bitcoin, it was March 12th. But exactly the same thing happened. And that's why you saw liquidations of gold and silver and dollars, anything got liquidated because people needed to cover their margin calls. So margin calls by themselves are not a bad event. It's not like somebody did something illegal, right?
Right.
The question is, are you there to make money on margin calls, or are you there to protect your users? And that's where Celsius is different than all the other guys, right? So Celsius basically said, look, when we created Celsius, we looked back 11 years and we said, wow, look, there was like 12 events in which Bitcoin went down 50%. What are we going to do if it happens tomorrow? We don't want to lose our customers. It takes us so much effort to bring customers. Do we really want to liquidate them? Do we really want them to lose all their money? Or let's find a way to avoid that or mitigate that. So we said, okay, fine. We know that when volatility starts, you're going to see these spikes. So anytime there's an increased volatility, we're going to notify our customers. So we immediately tell you, hey, there is increased volatility. You have a loan outstanding. Do you want to put more collateral in? Or do you want to reduce your loan? Or do you want to sell some of your coins to reduce the ratio so you have more protection, right? Because basically you're giving yourself more equity. It's not that we did not act or we avoided doing liquidations or anything like that. We were just much more communicative. We were much more
sounds like you're
proactive.
Yeah,
exactly. And we have offices in I think 7 or 8 time zones. So we covered almost 24 hours a day for all these people. But even if you weren't awake and you missed the flash, we still allowed you to send us coins. If we saw on the blockchain that you actually initiated the transaction, because remember, the biggest problem was on March 12th was not that, not only that it dropped 50%, it was that even if you send the coins, it took them sometimes an hour to get there. So
exactly,
that's right.
And exactly. So unless you knew that you had to pay very high gas, or you had to adjust your sending parameters, you would not get into the next block or the next 10 blocks. So we said, fine, if things like this happen, I'm talking about, we did that in 2017, right? We said, as long as somebody initiates a transaction, there's one block, we trust the blockchain to accept that to avoid liquidations, right? Because we see the transaction initiated, we know it's already pending. Yes, somebody can fool us, somebody can steal from us by reversing the transaction or whatever, but we know our community. We're going to trust our community instead of liquidate our community, right? And that's where Celsius, and because of that, we only liquidated 6 people, you know, so 0 institutions, because they all gave us everything they were committed to do. We only work with the biggest institutions, and 6 people out of again, almost 100,000 users.
That's
so,
a remarkably small amount,
amazing.
really. And you know, one of the
because credit goes to this community.
right.
We are the hodler community. This is what we are. So the community came through. The community said, we're not withdrawing our coins. We're not running away. We're not those speculators on BitMEX that BitMEX had to liquidate $1 billion. We are the hodlers. We are the guys who buy these coins when they drop 50%. And that's exactly what we've seen. People buy more coins, deposit more coins. And that's why when you look at, we have a different set of customers than BlockFi and Nexo. And part of why they got so many thousands of liquidations, if you go on Twitter, you'll see thousands of people complaining about that, is because they have the traders and the speculators, and we have the hodlers.
There's a lot of speculation going on. I think it's interesting because we're in a speculative investment to begin with, right? There's still a lot of high risk in the digital asset space in terms of where it's going, people taking additional risk. I think that platforms owe a duty to their users, as you're kind of explaining, to protect them. The further duty that the platforms owe them is to make sure that in the event of a flash crash, that there's preparation thought out in advance, as you're indicating. But as we saw with BitMEX, as we saw with BitTrue, as we saw with Nexo, and I'm sure we've seen with others that are out there in the space, they also suffered technical issues which prevented people from actually logging in to top up and to balance out, you know, the margin call. And I think that on its face is problematic, because if you're going to be in a space where you want people to put their money in your hands, then you have to protect them in some fashion. And step number 1 is the technical aspect. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're 100% right. But all of that goes back to how the business was set up in the first place. When Coinbase set up their business back in 2014, they didn't set up a business that said, how do we protect the community? How do we grow the community? How do we empower the community? They created a copy of the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, where they're a neutral party. They don't represent the buyer or the seller. They just make the transaction come through and they collect the fee. Celsius is not that. We're not a neutral party. We always represent the depositor. We always represent the hodler. We never represent the institution. Actually, we are almost an agent of the hodler, negotiating the best deal to extract as much as possible out of the institution and give back 80% to the hodler. Now, I'm a rich guy. I have fancy homes all over the world. I know how it works. When I go and I give $10 million to Blackstone, that is the arrangement I have with them. Blackstone says, look, we want to work really hard for you, the LP. We're going to give you 80% of what we make. We're going to keep 20%. It's not like Celsius or Alex invented a new business model. It's just that this business model was only available to the very rich. And we took it and we said, if you're a hodler with $10 from Vietnam, we're going to treat you the same way as if you were an LP in Blackstone with $20 million, right? So the question is, how do you set up the business? Are you really here for the community? Are you really here to build something that replaces the banks and the exchanges and Wall Street, or you're just copying all the worst practices from Wall Street, right? And that's why I keep saying the community has to vote with their coins. The power is with us. We can vote to support. I want 100 people to copy Celsius. I want people to pay 90% to the community. That is the model. And people should be giving their coins to these institutions instead of giving their coins to the guys who just keep taking fees and taking their coins away from them. And we will never grow as a community if all we're doing is recycling one bad company to another. All we're doing is, if it's not BitConnect, then it's something else.
Yeah, exactly.
And why would new people join? Why? Unless hardcore guys like us, why would the average Joe trust us or join this community, considering the last 11 years worth of hacks and scams and everything else?
There's a lot of it. Yeah.
I'm just saying that's what we have to fix.
Yeah, let me ask you just a follow-up. Sorry, Chip, just one more follow-up to that, and it has to do with the way the borrowing part of these platforms are portrayed. Do you feel that most people are getting into putting their money into investment, let's say with Celsius or Next or any of them? Do you believe that everybody understands when they are borrowing that they're entering into a margin relationship where they have there's a potential that can be liquidated?
Look, we definitely have unsophisticated or less sophisticated users who may never have done a margin borrow from a brokerage account and so on. So they do need to, it's on us to explain to them the risks, the downsides, and so on. So are we doing a good job at it? I don't know. We maybe get a B or maybe a B plus. We're not doing enough to educate the people. And look, I think we're doing a better job than others, but we can do even better, right? To kind of educate people about what is a margin borrow, what could be the scenarios, what happened in the past, how much do you need to have. But we are much more proactive with it. I'll give you an example. We just launched yesterday. We launched a new program, 1% interest. So you'll pay. This is limited to only $10 million. And you can't borrow more than $200,000. So it's targeting the people who are really struggling, to give them basically what PPP did, but a lot of people don't qualify for PPP, right? So we basically said, we're going to take $10 million out of our treasury and we're going to give it to the people who really got hurt by COVID all over the world. Doesn't have to be only in the United States. And we're going to charge them 1%. And we're going to do it at 25% LTV. Why? Because these people mostly are not going to understand, like you said, they're not going to understand what that means. But by putting a very low LTV, that's what gives them the protection, right? So if you are going to target these people, then it's on you to make sure that you are protecting them and acting in their best interest. Giving somebody, I saw people give 70 and 80% LTV, right? And charging them 14% interest, and then not just that they got liquidated, they charged them 16 or 20% liquidation fees. And this includes, by the way, DeFi. The DeFi Pro platform on March 12th charged most of their customers 16% liquidation fees, and hundreds of millions of dollars got liquidated. So DeFi is supposed to be better than Celsius. DeFi is supposed to be a smart contract that just does everything for you. So how can a smart contract, a pure smart contract, can cost you 16% in fees? So my point is that the business models created by our community are not here to replace the banks. They're not here to solve the problem for the 7 billion people who we want to bring on this platform. Again, going back to Voice of IP, you're not going to find a single person in the world who's going to look at the Voice of IP and say, oh, Alex or somebody else promised us this. Look what he delivered. It's horrible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and I still have to pay for internet access. No, it does what it was intended to do. And it's upon us to deliver value to the hodler and represent the hodler, and not be a neutral party, not be the, like a toll collector, like basically what we ended up with.
It's amazing. So, I was going to say, the one thing that I was going to say is like a lot of times in a different market, when you're trading a margin, they want an accredited investor, like they have some sort of a benchmark. But I think you brought something
Yeah.
up really important, Alex, is that as a community, we can talk about somebody out there. We can say that person and that person, but it always starts at this person right here and sort of coming together. Like this tribal mentality has always killed me. It's like you wouldn't have necessarily Bitcoin. Imagine if you had a stock market and it was just Amazon. It was like this thinking of there can be only one. That's a great idea and a fun little concept, but we want, like you had said it beautifully, that if 40 or 50 or 100 people copied your model, we would all be better off. So I think that with that being said, it's good to know and refreshing to know that this other concept of thought and giving back, because most of the time it's always like take, right? And I wanted to kind of transition to something too, because I wanted to find out, how do you have time to build all these companies, and then you have 6 children as well? Is that right?
Yes.
Wow, it's
Look,
amazing.
we're recording this on a Saturday, and I don't have an off switch. I mean, I work 7 days a week. I love what I'm doing, so it's not really work.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys love what you're doing, so I can't wait to wake up in the morning and change the world. And again, it's not me doing it, right? We have 70 employees, we have 400 ambassadors all over the world. They are the guys doing all the hard work, right? I might come up with part of the idea, I might have inspired a bunch of people, but when something is right, my job is just to trailblaze, to find that crack in the wall, and then an army of people comes and pushes through it, right? And look, you talked about profit making. This is my 8th company as a founder. Okay, so I've done this again and again and again. Every few years, I founded a company, and almost all my companies that you mentioned are do good first and then do well, right? Wireless in the subway. The service is provided free. Wi-Fi and 4G and 5G is provided free to 8 million New Yorkers, right? I got the phone companies to pay for something that we're giving for free to 8 million people. I lived in New York for 30 years, and my best friend died in September 11th. And right after that, I said, this is lunacy. For him, I'm going to make sure that I'm putting, because I don't know if you know, when the towers collapsed, people got stuck in the subways for days. I mean, they couldn't get them out. And there was no communication. The only thing you could do is get to a station and use a payphone, So imagine the lines and things like that. So this is an example of am I profiting from transit wireless? Immensely, but we did good and then did well, right? Voice of IP, we did good, then we did well, right? Celsius Wireless, we did good, and now we're going to do well. So the whole concept that like Wall Street, where you want a friend, go get a dog. That's a saying on Wall Street, right? No, you don't have to steal from somebody else. Just recently when the CEO of Goldman Sachs was interviewed by the Senate, and they asked him about his customers, said, my customers are my counterparties. When you're treating your customers as counterparties, that just says everything, right? So we treating our customers as everything. Everything we do is for the hodler, for the depositor. And when you're starting there, then it's very easy to make everyday decisions, because you always act in the best interest of your customers. You always do good before you do well. And unfortunately, we don't have enough companies like this in our community. And my whole point is guys, look, I'm the American dream. I came here with nothing, and I built again and again companies that did good and then did well. Why don't you copy me? That's
well
what I'm trying
said.
to say.
Very well said. I got to tell you, that kind of philosophy, it's a winning philosophy. You've proven it time and time again. So I know we're coming up on time here.
Especially during the coronavirus, where
Right on.
30 million Americans are out of a job, and it's going to take us 2 years to get back to anything, right?
Yeah, and there's an opportunity to really make something out of the ashes, out of the rubble that we're facing. So the economy's been brought to its knees globally. And like you said, 2 years to come out of it. I really anticipate we're going to see some amazing things, coming out of this.
Yeah, look, I did a podcast yesterday with, I do a weekly podcast, an AMA on our YouTube channel on Celsius Network, and I think if I can deliver one message out of all of this, forget about the blockchain, forget about interest income and all that stuff. Most people see this event, the coronavirus popping the bubble, the debt bubble that we had, mostly corporate debt, a recession or a depression upon us, as okay, game over. But really, it's a reset. And in a reset, every one of us has the chance to start from the beginning, because it's like a race that got reset and everybody got lined up in the same line. And the winners that won the race yesterday are not the winners who are going to win the race tomorrow, because the skill sets have changed. The people that we need, the people who are going to be our leaders, the people who are going to help us get through this are the different people than the people who brought us here, right? So we're at this line now where the race is about to start, and each one of us has to look at his own skill set and its own passion and find what they're best at. And in many cases, that skill set is going to become the new winner. And it's not going to be the guy who we marveled yesterday, who may have been a great allocator of capital and he made a lot of money because he was on Wall Street and so on, so on, so on, right? Because that skill set is irrelevant right now, okay? So my point to all of your viewers is that instead of being in despair, they have to look at this as an opportunity. And for Celsius, starting March, we doubled. We don't advertise at all. We don't spend $1. You're not going to find an ad of Celsius. But we doubled the number of people signing up with us because more people had to reevaluate their life and said, okay, well, I need to save more. Where am I going to do it? Let me find something that is non-correlated, and then landed on Celsius. So we happen to have started at the right place at the right time 2 years ago. But for most of your viewers, there's never been a better time in their lives to reset and start and do something again with their heart, to do good, and they will do well. That is the most important message. If I could deliver, as someone who started 8 companies, if you want to listen to one thing I'm telling you, okay, now is the time.
Are you down with OTC? Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when the next video drops.